Well, 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 Star Trek Strange New Worlds Ghost of Illyria. A pleasant surprise in many ways, honestly.
Yeah, it took us all by surprise actually with this episode. At first we were like expecting it to be just awful, and
Yeah.
it had actual story parts, though not to say it was perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
The first episode had the problem of being overtly politicized. The entire episode felt like it existed for no other reason than to throw in a cheap shot at the January the 6th, let's call it riots, because this is on YouTube, legal requirements, etc. And everything happened just for that moment, to the point that Spock, who they knew couldn't disguise himself because his body was literally rejecting the disguise, was still sent down to the planet specifically to reveal the infiltration team. Like, dumb shit. The second episode just felt incredibly formulaic and forced. It was a introducing Uhura,
Yeah, you got it.
Uhura episode, where again you've got singing space rock, singing Kenyan folk songs at them. Like, okay, dumb and formulaic and with way too many plot holes, as is always the case when you introduce anything omnipotent, as this magic space rock was supposedly. But this episode, this one's got a lot more. The previous episodes, they had the ingredients, but they couldn't bring them together. They couldn't nail them down. Here, they were very, very close to actually getting a good, solid episode. I mean,
you had lots of character development even happening.
A bit too much, actually. That's part of the problem.
We'll get to that.
A lot of it was very sudden. So they arrive at a station where there are Illyrians. The Illyrians are... They seem to be a new thing, I believe. A race of genetically engineered creatures that some of them look outwardly human, some of them apparently don't, from what I've been able to look up. And this was a research station. The Enterprise was sent there to, figure out what the hell they were doing, which sounds like it's a bit outside of the Federation's jurisdiction, but details.
Yep, details. Investigating a planet, by the way, that the Illyrians, because they're what do you call them? Not amulets.
Amulets?
Augments.
Genetically
they're
altered,
augments,
augments.
And augments are banned in the Federation, so generally they don't like to interact with them as even physically.
Yes, and this was due to the eugenics war, etc., and due to Khan. And we learn also that, this is a bad part of character growth here, where Laan Noonien Singh is just like, oh, you're a descendant of Khan, right? And like, yeah, it's a bit of a hefty ancestor to have. Like, what? Why?
When? How?
Yeah. Like, did Khan have children? No. Did he have relatives that we know of? No. Like, he's an augment. We don't even know if he can have children, seeing as he's never had any. He's never had a family as far as anybody aware, and here's like, oh, our security officer happens to be... Like, this is like having the grandchild of Adolf Hitler working for you, and nobody mentions it. It's just like, yep.
Yeah, Khan is kind of...
Like, he has that stigma because he was a former dictator.
He was one of the worst fucking villains in Star Trek history, pretty much.
Yeah, he's a pretty big one, because in the original series he was there, and in the second Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan, one of the most iconic things where Kirk screams, Khan, into the comms.
But still, like, the stigma attached to this is pretty massive, and it's just dumped on you. I mean, let me put it like this. Hitler's living relatives today, their last name ain't Hitler.
Yeah, but they kind of want to distance themselves from that. Hell, like, a lot of people didn't want to even, associate with that names. Even if they weren't related, they actually changed their name from Hitler or Adolf and things like that. It became very much a thing that people wanted to distance themselves from.
Yes.
In the same vein that she would, her ancestors who had her would have probably done the same thing, especially after Khan fell out of power on Earth.
And Part of me thinks that this is probably some kind of future plot point setup. Like maybe they'll go back in time or something and they'll see Khan or something like that. I'm assuming they have a plan for this because it feels like such a pointless anti-fan character self-insert. This is one of the key attributes of an anti-fan character. And she's fulfilling more and more of these points. Like, everybody likes her. She's friends with everybody. You haven't seen her become friends with any of these people, but she's totally on good footing with everyone. Everybody is, this character's really good, and they have a special backstory and stuff, blah, blah, blah. And they're really strong and competent, too. It's like, we'll see where it goes with her, but I'm not liking Security Officer in the slightest. Now...
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I was going to add to that.
Because I don't want to be too negative on this episode, because I actually quite liked it, right? Because there was some good stuff here. The second in command, number 2, she has an interesting introduction. So there's a bullshit virus that travels on light.
Magic.
Yep.
Don't worry, pseudoscience mumbo jumbo. Gotcha.
Yep, that these colonists suffered from due to the Iron Storm, and apparently the colonists themselves ran out into the storm and got struck by lightning, and because this is the Marvel universe now, being bitten by a spider makes you Spider-Man, and being hit by lightning turns you into living thunder. It's just... fine, bullshit, fine, you know? Anywho...
Yeah, a bit strange.
She has a very obvious reaction to this, where she's chilling in her room and she starts masturbating to her light stand and glowing red and shit. And you're like, okay, it's a bit weird. And she reports to sickbay, and she claims to not have any symptoms. And at first we're like, okay, this is weird. Why isn't she telling anybody about this? Because this is obviously weird. Like, she's physically glowing. There's no way she just misses this shit, right?
Yep.
And that's a good beginning to the mystery, because then she's acting a little bit suspicious. She's continuously acting a little bit suspicious. And some of the other characters also act suspicious, like Dr. Mabenga, who screws with one of the technicians' attempts to repair his sickbay. And he turns off the light, and then he turns it back on again. Like, okay. So is the infection thing changing their minds? Is this some kind of mind control effect, etc.? And
then... Yeah, and then we see characters begin to lose control. Also, there's one scene when they first introduced that where the one of the dudes on the away team comes back and he takes a panel off and smashes his head against some glass in order to get closer to the light.
yes,
Because that's where we first see it, and like they start to plant the clues because we're a little skeptical at first, but you can very quickly pick up due to the storytelling that the light virus, if you want to call it that, is very much it's distorting their cognitive abilities to the point where they can't rationalize as much.
yes.
Like
And
their desire to get high is overtaking them.
they just need the light, which is hardly a revolutionary story point. I think I've seen it in Donald Duck at some point, but
Probably, yeah.
like, fair enough. And honestly, the disease itself is a side character to the number 2 officer, who... And I really like the way they revealed this, right? Because the technical officer is trying to transport in a piece of goddamn plasma onto the ship.
From the planet's core.
Yep. And so she knocks him out. And then he's lying there, you know, he's unconscious, and she picks him up like he's nothing. And immediately I'm like, holy shit, she's an augment. Like, that was a good way of revealing it. Because it wasn't overtly obvious unless you were thinking about it. It wasn't stated. You weren't told. For once, we were shown a plot point.
Yeah. It was very subtle too, because they'd been talking about the augments. They talked about the Illyrians. They talked about the augmentations and how they were banned at the Federation. They had been carefully sowing the seeds of all this story stuff, and then they reveal it. And as you're watching it, you're going like, you've connected the dots in your head, but the show managed to do it in such a way where and this isn't even revolutionary. The old Star Trek shows used to do this, but it's sad we're pointing it out because we're like, wow, they did storytelling by just showing instead of just telling us, and exposition dumping. We actually saw progression, and it was kind of nice for a change, honestly.
Yeah, no, this was solid. This was solid storytelling. This is how you're supposed to be telling a story. And then she, of course, eventually outright states as well. And what's good about this is that a good puzzle is a puzzle that it isn't necessarily a hard puzzle or a difficult puzzle or a clever puzzle. A good puzzle is a puzzle that makes the person who solves it feel smart, especially in entertainment. Oh, that was actually pretty damn good. And then she reveals herself to be an augment. I stated outright in case anybody had missed it. She goes through a little bit of nonsense here and there. And I didn't like the resolution here because there was no resolution to the light virus issue. Nobody came up with anything clever or a immunization scheme or a maybe if I ionize my butthole's tenderloins I can cure this. No. Security officer Ling Sing Ping Pong, or whatever the hell, runs into the warp core and decides to just lower the shields. And then her and the number 2 get dosed with radiation, which somehow fixes the goddamn light virus, and the security officer is cured by, quote, chimeric antibodies that spread to her.
Yeah, that's like okay. So the chimeric antibodies raised an excellent question about the first officer being an augment, because it's like okay, or the number 2, so to speak. Because if number 2 is an augment and she has antibodies that are chimeric and they can spread from another person, then what if she does attract or contract something horrific, later on? Would that mean that she's like a
Super
walking
spreader.
bomb, a super spreader? Because is that related to that, or is it related to the fact that the virus itself was carrying? They didn't really explain it. They sort of just glossed over it, and that was a bit disappointing because it's like, okay, like normally Star Trek, they explain what was happening, and then they get like the satisfactory of, oh, that's what it was, and then that's how it all pieces together, Because every Star Trek episode is normally a mystery most of the time.
To be fair, they did presage this a little bit when she was asking, like, hey, can you use my blood to make, like, an antidote? And he's like, no, if I was right there when it happened to you, maybe. But that is still, like, okay, here's the thing. When I'm watching Star Trek, I am willing to, I think, as a part of the contract here, I accept that I'm going to be told sci-fi mumbo-jumbo nonsense that makes no sense whatsoever, and then somebody goes like, yes, that might just work. I get it, okay? But chimeric antibodies? Oh, that is a load.
There was a couple of those. Like the fact that if you touch lightning, you turn into a lightning person. Like that was a bit much. I'm a lightning person now.
Again.
But the reveal for that was cool, though, that the Illyrians turned into those people, because they set it up in such a way where they're hostile at first, they're creepy at first, but then you're like, wait a minute, as you're starting to piece the puzzle together, before the reveal happens, you're like, they're not gonna, when they break into the room where Piker and
Scott. Oh, Scott.
Oh my God, no, it's Spock. That's
Scott.
You made me forget his name for a second. Spock is hiding, right?
Yeah.
And
Piker and Scott.
You're like, oh no, they're gonna, and they're like, wait, no, they're not actually gonna attack them, because instead they're gonna protect them from the storm, because they're not hostile, they're not malicious, they are the colonists. And then it's funny because later Spock puts the same pieces of the puzzle together. Granted, his two logic-y things both make sense. But it's one of those things where it's like, he did do it a little slower than normal.
The thing is, right, I get what the show is doing. It's giving you the hints so that you can piece it together, and then it's spelling it out. Like, okay, fair enough. And I didn't mind the energy wraiths thing either, because they introduced a little bit creepy. They're like, oh, and then they start attacking the door, which is stupid again, because it's like, okay, if you were actually non-hostile and they still managed to retain their personalities, their first action wouldn't be bang on the door, bang on the door, bang on the door. It's like a bit forced, but not awful. Not awful.
Yeah, that was a bit forced, especially the part where they start barricading the door. It's silly.
Yeah,
like, okay,
especially
dude, like,
also as The only
tables,
thing
like,
the Wraiths need to do here, because the problem is if the window shatters, okay, if the Wraiths actually just want to protect them instead of just scaring the shitless, it would be to just chill outside the window and be like, yeah, we're gonna block this off.
Yep, it was more so done to give you the red herring that the Wraiths were basically evil.
Yeah. Again, a little forced, but not bad, yeah? And you've got another bit of a dumb scene where number 2 is like, oh, Captain Piker, I lied to you. Would you like to kick me out of Starfleet? And it's like, no. It's like, oh, shocking surprise, I guess.
He's like, he's not going to kick you out because, number 1, you're his number 2, he trusts you, and you built a relationship, apparently, over time. They haven't shown this, though. That you two know each other well, you clicked well. Like, he's not going to just throw you under the bus.
Yeah. And this is one of the errors that the show does make. It assumes far too often that we know way too much and care way too much about these characters. There's also a reveal later on that was way too goddamn rushed with Dr. Mabungu, Bungu, Banga, something. Benga, Mabenga, that was it. Who apparently is keeping his and we call, like, again, there are too many cliches. The moment he's talking about, like, there's something in the teleporter, we're like, it's a person. And then we're just like, is it his wife or his daughter? I'm like, daughter. And it's his daughter.
It was his daughter. And we called it right as she confronts him about it, like, all right, why did you not use the transporter thing? Like, our transporter buffer hasn't been upgraded. And the thing is, if you know anything about Star Trek, you know right away there's somebody trapped inside the buffer, or the buffer's being used for something. Mm-hmm. Because why wouldn't they upgrade the buffer? The only reason why they wouldn't is because they're worried about something being erased, and that thing is a person. That person is his daughter.
Yes, and this was the reason why the light virus got aboard too, because of this buffer upgrade thing that didn't happen.
So it is nice that it all tethers together, but he because of his personal thing, he did jeopardize the crew. Like, I do want to point that out.
And this
I do like how it's all connected, but he still jeopardized the entire crew with that virus because he didn't inform them that he was doing that with the buffer and that his daughter was in it.
It was revealed too quickly. What should have happened here is that everyone should be like, my God, we just don't understand how this darn dang happened. And then he should be like, yes, I don't understand either. And then you should cut to a separate shot of him just clicking a button that says transponder on it or something, and then his face lighting up with the transponder lights. That's what should have happened. There should have been a hint of this, because this is a whole plot point, because his daughter is sick. He joined Starfleet specifically to try and find a cure for her. He's secretly keeping her in the buffer, etc., to keep her alive and so on. And he's doing all of this off the grid, highly illegal, highly goddamn dangerous, etc. This should have been a full plot point, with flashbacks showing this, and also showing him being tortured by this. Like, oh my God, I risked the entire crew. Should I tell anyone? What'll they do? Blah, blah, blah.
Yep, in a constant state of battling his emotions for his urge to save his daughter, but also his duty as the ship's doctor to look after the crew.
Yes, this was an excellent opportunity for some real character building for Mabungu.
Yes.
Mabunga. Benga. Goddamn.
Oh, God dang it. But the thing is, it was nice, but it shouldn't have been this episode. Like, it shouldn't have been this episode because just a minute before this, like, we just had the same arc happen with the second in command with Piker.
Yes, that was the problem too, because the exact same conversation that number 2 had with Captain Pike, she now, because she's the one who figured out that there's somebody in the buffer, and so she has the exact same conversation with Mabenga, where Mabenga is like, I know I broke regulations, I'll take any punishment you can give me, would you just let me see my daughter one last time? And when she was doing this to Pike, Pike was like, no, because, you know, he was setting up I'm not going to do anything mean to you. Do you think I'm crazy? And she does the exact same thing. It is the precise same interaction. And I get what they're trying to do. What they're trying to do is like, okay, she's an Illyrian. She's not at all inhuman. In fact, she's just as nice a person as Captain Pike. I get it. But this was too good of a plot point to just shovel out the door like that.
Yes, and this episode. See, the thing is, we'll show whether this episode or this series, has any sort of actual potential is these two big story things that happen. Number one is the plot with number two and her character development as an Illyrian. Because Piker stuck up for her, that needs to become an issue. There needs to be like a Federation tribunal, and the Federation bureaucrats figure this out. And there needs to be like an actual like legal debate over why Illyrians should be given more rights in the Federation, adversely to how they are treated. That needs to become an issue later on. The second thing that needs to become an issue later on is Mabenga's daughter. So there's two huge story things that they better not just drop here, because that would be remarkably bad, because they're both interesting threads for these characters.
You know, these needs to be brought back up again. Like, they really do need to be brought back up again, because again, these are major things, and I feel like the problem is it's going to be hammering the point home a little bit too damn much, because already you can feel them leaning into this, like, oh, the Illyrians are victims of bigotry. It's like, oh, god damn it, here we fucking go. Oh. But there are absolutely ways you can do this in a decent way. A way in which you can go, okay, you know, these are people who have actually been the victims of a degree of persecution. Like, they've been banned from Starfleet, they've been banned from the Federation, and it's because of things that are misunderstood. Yes, they are genetic augments, but they haven't messed with their minds. They're not bad people, they're not monsters, and they aren't doing this for any of the same similar reasons as Khan did. You know, world dominations, conquest, and eugenics, extermination, etc. Instead, they're simply just people who's like, okay, well, we get sick easy, so let's find a way to fix our diseases by messing with our genes. And you can definitely do a cool little introspective about that, like, what's really so bad about genetic modification? And of course, they need to counterweigh this as well, which they did in part in this episode by showing the Illyrian colonists having turned into energy wraith things. Like, okay, all well and good when you get it to work properly, but when you mess up, it's gonna be awful too.
I do think there could be a lot of problems that they could deal with in the next episode or future episodes, where they have to discuss these changes, as well as, you know, debate within the Federation as to why these are bad and why were they banned in the first place. And present a fair argument for both parties, so we can see both perspectives and understand why the Federation established this bias to begin with, why they're so anti augments, and as well as why, you know, augments also have their, you know, benefits as well. Besides characters like, you know, Khan and, you know, energy wraiths, which are obviously very bad, but there are good things that can come out of augmentations.
Yep. They need to give both sides a fair hearing, and of course that's assuming they ever pick this back up again, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is that the show has this one cool episode, brings up these cool points, and this will never be mentioned ever again.
Yep, that is unfortunately a problem that Star Trek has done in the past. Though normally it's like an episode that's like, oof, I hope they never reference that again. And they didn't, they don't, and you're like, oh, good, that was just a filler episode, because that was bad. You know? But this is interesting. I think this is stuff that should be mentioned later. This is stuff that very much I feel like it's foreshadowed here, and we should see it later on. And I hope that other characters as well will get their elements like this as well. Because while the show is deeply flawed and has a lot of issues, especially with the first episodes being very much rough starts, it's not unordinary for a Star Trek show to not have a good start. The Next Generation had 2 rocky seasons where they couldn't quite find their footing, and it wasn't until the 3rd season when the show started to actually come together. So hopefully they can do a lot better than that, but again, they have a lot of ground to cover. There's still a lot of problems with the show as well.
Yes, the pacing here was not great. They were squeezing too many plot points into the same episode, and a lot of the plot points didn't need to have to be in this episode. And they've also got this... Every episode so far has focused around one singular thing. and the entire episode has been absorbed by this one thing. And the problem with this is we don't get to really develop a relationship with any of the other characters. They need a bit of a broader face here, because episode 1 was all about Kirk. Episode 2 was all about Uhura. This episode was all about number 1 actually. What is her name, by the way? Una Chin Riley. Oh, Jesus Christ. Why must every one of them have such a...
Oh, these names are not good. Like, come on, number 2 from Next Generation was Riker. Number 2 from Voyager was Chakotay. It's easy to remember because you think Chipotle, you know?
Yeah,
It's simple.
Right. Riley. We'll just call her Riley then. Fine, Riley.
That's
Finally,
so
our number
much
1.
better.
Yeah, there you go. Something like that. They need to... Because the problem is, like, with the Dr. Mabungo... God damn it. Mabanga.
Mabanga. We're having our time.
With the Dr. Mabanga, is that we don't know him. Our only relationship with him is that I'm the doctor. Cool. All right. And now suddenly he's like, yeah, I've got a daughter. I've been saving the USB port for the last 20 years. It's a bit weird, I know, but just cut me a break, man. Like, that's a heavy-duty plot point to drop on me all of a sudden.
Also, how has he managed to keep it secret? Like, that's a huge deal, too. Like, there's a lot of factors here. Like, while these things are cool, they need further expanding. And they also, like you said, with the character episodes, they need to do what they did in previous shows, like they did with Voyager and Deep Space Nine and whatnot, where they had an episode dedicated to a character, and the character was just doing something about their life on the ship or their hobbies and stuff, and it somehow got into some shenanigans or trouble, which led to drama for the sake of the episode's entertainment value. But the episode establishes and focuses in on that character, you know, because it's about that character, or it's about those two characters' friendship, like Harry and Kim, you know, in the Voyager show. Something akin to that. They need to definitely take their time. Now, we're only like 3 episodes in, so hopefully in a 20-episode season, they're going to allocate at least a couple episodes for, you know, some of the main cast of the crew.
Yes, they need to take a little bit of a step back and introduce us to the crew now, so that we get an idea of who's who, who's where, and why they're doing the things that they're doing. Because we're running a little bit mad now, and yes, okay, a lot of these characters are for the original show, sure, but most of their backstory has been made up whole cloth for this one. Like, Benga, got it right this time.
Mabenga, yeah.
Like, he's in the original show too, and his only real appearances are to, you know, pass a scanner over someone twice and be like, yes, gobbledygook, come on.
Yes, your spleen's failing.
Okay.
Yeah. They need to expand upon these a little bit more, because this was a damn good episode, everything considered, you know, by modern standards.
By modern standards, yes. It pales in comparison to the old stuff by a long shot, but comparatively speaking of the new Trek, like, let's talk about the... Okay, let's not. But you know the 2 new Trek series. There's that god-awful one and Picard.
Well, STD is still the best Trek, of course, but...
You filthy, unwashed barbarian.
But comparatively, if you want to show that Star Trek, rather than a much superior action show, then this is probably the best Trek there you go, the best Trek that has been made in a very, very long time. That isn't necessarily saying much, but it's definitely something.
It still has a lot of the new Trek problems, like the sets, the bridge, the ship, the lighting, the god awful. I don't understand. No, I know. It's from the new Trek movies. It's that stupid love of the lens flare. It's
the lighting.
My eyes. Stop it. Everything's way too bright. Even when they turned off the ship's light in today's episode, you pointed that out while we were watching it. It's still too bright. Like, they could have toned it down a bit. Like, the sets are just too bright. Too much lights.
Yeah, this is the problem. They're like, oh god, the disease spreads via light. We must initiate blackout protocols. The ship is like 5% less bright. There are still full-on lamps everywhere.
Yep, it doesn't feel very dark, all things considered. In fact, it feels like somebody just added a little bit of dim, like a dim mode for reading, you know?
Yep. There are still lights, everything is still active. It's like, wow, that did absolutely nothing. Not to mention, they also didn't lock down the rest of the ship to the point that the security officer, who had already been partially sedated, could just wander away and go like, I'm gonna blow up the ship.
Yeah, it does beg the question of, okay, so they have security teams aboard these Federation vessels, you know, basically armed soldiery dudes that keep order, right? So you'd think the security teams, as they're sedating people, would keep order as to make sure everyone's sedated and then lock down the area. That's another thing with the medical bay. I'm not 100% certain if, like, Trek technology hasn't advanced far enough, because I know about the more new shows, like, because in the new shows, when they're in the medical beds, they can actually put up a field to make sure that they can't leave, and that B, any contamination that's on their body stays on their body and doesn't leave either. So I get that it's earlier before the original series, so maybe they just don't have access to that technology, or they don't have an understanding of quarantine, because you think they would be like proper, like, cells or quarantine blocks, or hell, you know, use the brig even. You know, that would be better than nothing, than a giant open space where they're all breathing and touching each other, so to speak.
It's not very contaminant proof.
Yeah, it definitely begs the question of, like, I think the Federation's placing a little bit too much faith in their scrubbers for their teleportation devices. You know, technically it should have been fine, but, you know, there's a certain Mabunga's daughter that it threw a little bit of a wrench in that whole security protocol.
Yes, as it was proven that no, it was not fine. But still, overall, to wrap it up, good episode. As good as can be expected of a modern show, and something to build on. Bit rushed, a few plot holes here and there, some inconsistencies, some dumbness, but you know what? That wasn't bad. That wasn't bad.